And the very last section for the subject. So this is section 3 of session 12 and talking about law and ethics in complementary and alternative medicine. And basically what does it mean to be a professional within your modality? So I spoke about earlier in this session about having the different professional organizations that you can be a member of, how that can lift your status, how it can provide you with access to greater resources, knowledge base, advice, and support. So, you know, there's a lot of benefits to being involved in those professional organizations. The other side to that is, and something I mentioned already as well, is that certain modalities and professions have a statutory requirement to be professionally registered. So, for example, psychology, for me, for example, is one. Medical doctors be another. Within the complementary and alternative realm, we have, for example, chiropractors, traditional Chinese medicine is there as well, and one other one that I was going to say, Indigenous Australian medicine is there as well. And so those are professions in which, in order to practice as a member of that profession, you need to satisfy the requirements of the Australian Health Practitioners Regulatory Authority, AHPRA. In other words, to say you need to satisfy the requirements in terms of education and knowledge to be a practitioner in that field. And usually what that means is that to call yourself a psychologist or a traditional Chinese medicine practitioner is a protected title. So you're not allowed to use that title unless you are registered with AHPRA. Now, as I say, not all CAM therapies and modalities are within that area of regulation at this stage, and that's why being a member of the professional association can provide that kind of professional guidance and, to a certain extent, protection that you don't have if you're not registered via AHPRA. We'll talk a little bit more about what might be some of the pros and cons of that. But anyway, back to this notion of being a professional. So whether or not your particular modality is one that's regulated by AHPRA, you're still a professional within your modality. And so let's talk about some of the things that matter when it comes to being a professional in healthcare practice. And you know, as I have previously looked through these, they're all the same for me, for example, in psychology. So it doesn't matter what area of healthcare we practice in. All of these so-called commandments, as they're called here, they're just as important in any area of healthcare. So number 1, I shall practice in a competent, caring and responsible manner. Number 2, I shall keep up to date with developments, clinical techniques and professional and social issues. Number 3, I shall practice within the scope of my expertise and understand and respect my limitations. I shall practice from premises and use substances that are safe, legally compliant and conducive to the healing process. Number 5, I shall practice in accordance with the ethical precepts of my profession. So before we jump over the next screen, let's just have a quick think about the importance of these first 5. So I'll practice in a competent, caring and responsible manner. So competent means that we have the knowledge, we have the education, we know what we're doing. And obviously there's some overlap here as well, because if we jump down to look at number 3, I'm practicing within the scope of my expertise. So we're not claiming that we can do more than what we can, and if there is an area, even if it's within our profession, that it's not something that we're overly familiar with, we won't practice within that particular part of our profession. We'll say, okay, we need to refer on to someone who knows more about that. Back to number 1, caring and responsible, both seemingly self-evident but very, very important components of professional practice, that we are caring, that we have empathy for our clients, and that we take responsibility for what we do. The second part is keeping up to date, so engaging in continuous professional development. So even though we're already we're qualified and practicing, and in some cases registered, it doesn't mean that we don't need to maintain ongoing professional development to keep up with latest developments, particularly around research, but not just that, other professional and social issues, as it says there. 3, I've covered off already. Number 4, so using, doing no harm, essentially, is what number 4 is saying. We're doing things that are safe, but they're also we're practicing within legal limits as well, which seems, again, self-evident, but something that's very important. And number 5, practicing in accordance with the ethical guidelines of our profession. So most modalities will have a set of ethical guidelines by which they are ethically bound. If they're particularly if they practice, if you, for example, are practicing as a member of one of your professional associations, then you'd be expected to be following the guidelines as set up by that association. Okay, and then the second set of 5. So number 6, I shall compile and maintain thorough and legible records. I'm sure that is what that means there. So the importance of maintaining records about what we're doing with our clients, and that if someone else, for example, needs to take over for whatever reason, you were no longer able to work with a client and you weren't able to communicate what you've done with your client, it's of utmost importance to have records so that another practitioner from the same profession could look at your notes and be able to know exactly where you were at and where they would need to pick up the treatment with that client. Number 7, I shall maintain professional indemnity insurance. Again, this is something that it's the same across healthcare modalities. We all need to have indemnity insurance. Number 8, I shall respect the confidence of the therapeutic relationship to promote trust and confidence in my profession, in myself. So importance of the trust that we have with our clients, that we're maintaining confidentiality, for example. So all those ways in which we build and maintain trust with our clients. I shall provide accurate information to my client to allow proper decision making and consent to treatment, so that treatment is always with consent, and that consent is always informed. So we're telling the client exactly what we're doing and what their rights are within that, and that they agree to that treatment, and that I shall place my client's interests above my own, so that we're always acting with the client's best interests in mind rather than our own. And that, on that last point, it's why, for example, we can't be or become friends with our clients that even we think, oh, what a interesting and amazing person, I'd love to be their friend. It's not in their best interest in terms of their treatment for us to be friends with them, because then we start to lose objectivity in the way that we view them, and we can't just be their medical professional or their health professional anymore. So it's in the client's interest that we maintain them in that role as just our client. If we wanted to become friends with them because we want that friendship, then that's putting our interest above theirs. Okay, so finally now, just this issue related to the voluntary self-regulation versus statutory regulation. So certain modalities, professions have regulation by the government, so through APRA. But other modalities and professions are involved in self-regulation, and that means being a member of the professional association of that modality or of that profession, and following then, as I was saying, the codes of ethics and practice as set up by those associations. There's no legal enforcement to follow those, whereas if it's in a profession that's regulated by APRA, there is a legal enforcement of not having followed the guidelines of practice that have been set up for those professions. So the discipline that can occur may only be a suspension or expulsion from the professional association, but of course then that's questionable to what extent that actually works as a deterrent or would change the behaviour of the professional. And so, of course, there is the protection of the public is one of the main reasons that health professions are regulated, and because when the healthcare practitioner has behaved in a way which is contrary to the code of ethics and practice that has been established, then that's no longer acceptable, and they can no longer continue to practice as that legally as that healthcare practitioner. Very often what AHPRA will do, though, will be to try to rehabilitate, so to speak, the practitioner, so that that they are able to return to the practice. So it's they do try to work in a way so that the individual would then be able to begin practicing again. But of course, all practitioners, whether or not regulated by AHPRA, are subject to criminal and civil law and certain consumer legislation. And issues around, for example, mandatory reporting of certain issues, which varies from state to state. So, but in some states it may be, for example, it may be regulated by law that, and so it's so-called mandatory reporting, that you need to report by law any suspected case of child abuse, for example. And again, it varies state by state as to what professions are required to do that. But something that you need to be aware of, that what are the legal requirements in terms of practicing within your modality. So just finally, so CM practitioners without the status of registration inhabit a twilight zone between the scope of practice of registered professions and other common law and statutory limitations. This undefined scope has both limitations and advantages. So the two issues there is that, or the sort of the zone, that twilight zone between being an AHPRA registered profession and just having regular law around which you need to operate within, that twilight zone that's in between. So there's the kind of the self-regulation that's involved with the professional associations, but not the sort of tight legal regulation that comes with being a profession that's regulated by AHPRA. So I would say that, and it's something for you to think about in your own time, of what might be the benefits, or the pros and cons of working in a profession that sort of inhabits that twilight zone. So obviously the limitations are that it's not as clear to the public that you're a fully qualified person within that profession, because it doesn't come with that registration that's backed by AHPRA. But sometimes there's a lot of there can be a lot of hurdles to jump through when going through those registration processes as well. And so, I'm not suggesting in any way that there's anything wrong with being extra certain that practitioners are fully qualified and capable of doing what they do, but it's just something to think about, that what might be some of those limitations and advantages to that. I guess that issue of self-regulation, that what happens if someone does something wrong. So one thing we've spoken about is the difficulties perhaps in getting the registration, but then the protection for the public, but then also what actually happens when someone practices in a way that's not ethically correct, or even not that could even be placing people at risk. So again, those are the kinds of issues that we need to be thinking about. That is it, it may perhaps make life a bit easier to be in a profession that doesn't require AHPRA registration, and an AHPRA registration can be very strict and time consuming in complying with it. Expensive would be one of the other things, that it's a significant expense to pay a registration fee each year. However, as I said, there's a lot of protection for both practitioners and the public that come with that professional registration. And with that, and certainly we can see that because we do already have CM modalities that are regulated by AHPRA, that we could see that that would certainly be a direction that wouldn't be surprising if further modalities do come under the AHPRA umbrella in the future. But well, thank you very much for sharing this public health journey with me, and I wish you all the best for the rest of the assignments and for the rest of your studies. And if you're in a group with me, either on campus or online, I'll chat to you again another time. Take care.